Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. You know how this works. It's all about you and the stuff you want to explore. So today we're diving into thoughts.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It is. It is. And you've given us some really fascinating material to work with, like honestly, a lot of neuroscience, which I love.
Always a good place to start.
But then you also threw in some philosophy, even some Eastern spiritual traditions. It's going to be interesting to see how these all connect.
Well, and that's really at the heart of it, isn't it? Like, where do thoughts even come from? I mean, we all have them, but what are they exactly?
Right, like just thinking about thinking can make your head spin.
It really can. And some of the sources you sent touch on that, like this idea that thoughts might not even originate in our own brains. We'll get to that later, but for now.
Yeah, let's start with what we know for sure.
Okay, so neuroscience tells us that thoughts are definitely tied to the brain.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like if I don't get enough sleep,
Oh, you feel it.
big time, everything's foggy, can't think straight.
Exactly. Or think about how certain medications or even drugs can completely alter your mood, your thinking.
Yeah, true, true. So there's definitely a strong connection there.
No question. And one neuroscientist, David Eagleman, I think his name was, he describes thoughts as being like internal movements.
Internal movements. Okay. I'm intrigued. What does that even mean?
So imagine, like, instead of your arm reaching out to grab your coffee cup,
Mm-hmm.
your mind is reaching for an idea.
Okay, so it's like a movement, but not a physical one.
Right. It's like moving through concepts.
I kind of like that. So then how does that actually play out in the brain?
Well, he talks about these structures called cortical columns, and he compares them to like mini movie studios in your brain.
Whoa, hold on. Many movie studios. That's a cool visual.
Right. So basically, they take information from your senses and create a virtual model of the world.
Okay, so that's how I can like picture things in my mind, even if they're not actually there.
Exactly. You're running a simulation.
And this is happening all the time.
Pretty much. Yeah. Your brain is constantly simulating, predicting, planning, even when you're not consciously aware of it.
No wonder I'm exhausted by the end of the day.
Right. Brain's a busy place.
It is. But okay, so this is making me think about those times when like a solution to a problem just pops into my head. It doesn't feel like movement then. It's more like a sudden flash.
Oh, yeah, I get that. And that kind of gets at the idea that our internal experience of thought can be really different. Like some people have that constant inner voice.
Oh, totally. I'm definitely one of those.
Whereas others think more visually in images or even feelings.
Yeah, I'm more visual for sure. Words are secondary.
And that actually ties into what another neuroscientist was saying, Henning Beck. He talks about how this ability to think in concepts is something that really sets us apart from computers.
Oh, really? So like computers can't do that.
Well, they can process information way faster than we can, but they struggle with concepts. Like, he uses this example of a chair.
Okay, check.
So a computer would try to identify a chair based on, like, its shape, four legs, a seat, a back. But we understand the chair based on its function, like what it's for.
Right, so I can still tell it's a chair even if it's a beanbag or like a pile of cushions or something.
Exactly. We see the idea of a chair, not just the physical form.
That's fascinating. So is that something we're just born with? This ability to think in concepts?
Well, Beck's research suggests that, yeah, it's something we're wired for. And kids especially are incredible at picking up new concepts.
Makes you wonder if they're onto something. Like maybe thoughts aren't just these little electrical signals zapping around in our brains.
Right, like maybe there's something more to it.
Definitely something to think about.
And that leads us to the really big question. If thoughts are more than just brain activity, then where do they come from? Are they purely a product of our own minds, or is there something else going on?
I mean, some of the stuff you sent me gets pretty out there, like the idea of a collective mind or even like cosmic consciousness.
Yeah, some pretty wild ideas out there. But that's what makes this so interesting, right? Like pushing the boundaries of what we think we know about thought.
Totally. So what about this whole collective mind thing? What's the deal with that?
Well, one of the sources you gave me was from this spiritual teacher, Eckhart Tolle, and he talks about how our thoughts might not entirely be our own. Like, what if there's this field of thought energy that we're all tapping into?
Wait, so you're saying my brain isn't even coming up with my own thoughts?
Well, not necessarily all of them. He uses this analogy of thought bubbles, like they're just floating around out there. And depending on our state of mind, we kind of attract certain ones.
So if I'm stressed, I'm going to get all the stress thoughts.
Pretty much, yeah. He says it's like we're resonating with those thought bubbles that match our energy.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Like why I always seem to think negative thoughts when I'm in a bad mood.
Exactly. And he says the key is to not get too caught up in where those thoughts are coming from. Like, it doesn't really matter.
So it's more about what we do with those thoughts.
Right? He uses that parable about the person with the arrow in them. Like, the first thing you do is get the arrow out. You don't worry about who shot it or why.
Oh yeah, I remember that. It's about dealing with a problem, not getting stuck in the past.
Right. Focus on what you can control.
So okay, even if we don't buy into this whole collective mind thing, it's still a pretty cool way to think about managing your thoughts.
Definitely. It gives you a different perspective.
And speaking of different perspectives, you sent me that article about Nikola Tesla and his thoughts on thought. And that was pretty mind-blowing. Like he believed that our brains are basically receivers for thoughts coming from somewhere else in the universe.
Yeah, he was way ahead of his time. Like, a lot of people thought he was crazy.
Well, I can see why. But he was also a genius. Like, he came up with so many groundbreaking inventions. So maybe he was onto something.
Maybe he talked a lot about how his best ideas came to him in these flashes of inspiration, almost like downloads from somewhere else.
So like his brain was a radio picking up a signal?
That's the idea. And one of the scientists you mentioned even compares the brain to a mobile phone receiving signals from a distant tower.
Wow. That's trippy. So then how do we tune into the right frequency? Like, how do we filter out all the noise and get those genius-level thoughts?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And unfortunately, we don't really have an answer yet. Science hasn't quite caught up to Tesla's vision.
Maybe someday. But for now, it's pretty fun to think about.
It is, and it's a good reminder that we don't have all the answers. Like, there's still so much we don't know about the brain and consciousness.
Definitely, this whole deep dive has been a wild ride. We've gone from neurons to thought bubbles to cosmic frequencies, and amazing how many different ways there are to think about thought.
It is. And what's cool is how some of these ancient traditions actually align with some of these newer scientific ideas.
Oh yeah? Like what?
Well, you sent me some teachings from this Swami Mukundananda, and he's drawing from the Vedic scriptures, which are like thousands of years old.
Right. And he talks about how the mind isn't the same as the brain.
Exactly. He says the mind is more like the subtle energy that permeates the whole body, and that it's actually located in the region of the heart, not the head.
Whoa. So that's where the whole follow your heart thing comes from.
Maybe. But he goes even deeper than that. He talks about how the Vedas describe 4 levels of speech.
4 levels. Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
So there's Vaikari, which is like our everyday speech using words. Then there's Madhyana, which is thinking in words. And then Pashanti, which is thinking without words, more like intuition or flashes of insight.
Okay, I can kind of see how those are different.
And then the 4th level is Para, which is the most subtle level. It's described as thinking without thought.
Thinking without thought. Now that's just confusing.
I know it sounds paradoxical, right? But it's like those aha moments where the answer just comes to you effortlessly.
Oh, okay, I've definitely had those. It's like a sudden knowing.
Exactly. And this model suggests that there's this whole spectrum of thought, from the constant chatter in our heads to these moments of pure understanding.
So it's not all just one thing.
Right. And it makes you wonder if we could learn to access those deeper levels of thought more intentionally.
Like train our minds to think differently.
Exactly. And this actually connects to another source you shared, the work of J.C. Bose, who was an Indian scientist.
Okay, I remember him. He did some fascinating research on plants.
Right? And he showed that even though plants don't have brains like we do, they still have emotions and they can respond to our thoughts and feelings.
Wow. So like if I'm feeling stressed, my plants can feel it too.
That's the idea, and it suggests that our thoughts might have a much greater impact than we realize. Like maybe they're not just confined to our own heads.
It's like our thoughts are creating ripples in this field of consciousness that connects us all.
Maybe so. It's a pretty amazing thought.
I mean, it makes you wonder, right? Like if our thoughts can actually affect a plant, what kind of power do they have over our own lives?
It's a good question, and it brings us to this guy, Jiddu Krishnamurti, a philosopher you included in the materials. He really emphasized this idea of observation, like being able to quiet the mind and just observe your thoughts without judgment.
So instead of getting all caught up in that constant chatter, you can just kind of step back and watch it.
Exactly. He believed that that's how you access deeper levels of awareness, like you create space for insights to emerge.
Okay, I could see that. It's like when you meditate and you focus on your breath, you notice the thoughts, but you don't engage with them.
Yeah, perfect example. It's not about stopping thoughts altogether. It's more about changing our relationship to them.
That's interesting. So how do you actually do that? Like, how do you just observe your thoughts without getting sucked in?
Well, Krishnamurti talked about how the very act of observation can actually change what is observed.
Wait, what? Seriously?
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing, right? He was saying that by simply observing our thoughts, we might actually be transforming them.
So it's like shining a light on those thought patterns, and suddenly they don't have the same power over us.
Exactly. It's about becoming aware of the thinker, not just the thoughts themselves.
It reminds me of what Eckhart Tolle was saying. Like, you don't have to believe every thought that pops into your head.
Right. It's about recognizing that you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that's observing those thoughts.
Okay, that's deep. I'm going to have to ponder that one for a while.
It's a lot to take in, I know, but that's the beauty of these deep dives, right? We're getting to explore all these different perspectives and see how they connect.
It's been an incredible journey, seriously. We started with the neuroscience, the physical brain stuff, and we ended up talking about cosmic consciousness and the power of observation. My mind is officially blown.
I know, right? It's amazing how much ground we covered. And it just goes to show that there's still so much we don't know about the mind and consciousness.
So much to explore. Well, to everyone listening, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into thoughts. It's definitely given us a lot to think about.
Definitely. And if you're interested in learning more, we encourage you to check out some of the sources that we talked about. They're all listed in the show notes.
And let us know what resonated with you. What are your thoughts on thoughts? Do you see them as internal movements, bubbles in a collective mind? Or maybe something else entirely?
We'd love to hear your perspective. And who knows, maybe your questions will inspire our next deep dive.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep those thoughts flowing. And maybe try observing them every now and then. You might be surprised by what you discover.
See you next time.